So, in the wake of that terrible plane crash in Toronto, that Delta plane that ended up on its roof, of course, and thankfully everyone managed to get out. Nobody was, well, there were injuries, but I think of the 21 people, latest update, that were injured, 20 have already been released from hospital. There was no loss of life. And then today we find out from Delta, their flight, their plane, that they are going to offer now, or are offering, $30,000 US to passengers on that plane that crashed at Pearson, with a company spokesperson saying the money has, quote, no strings attached and does not affect rights, unquote. So the question then becomes, do you take the 30,000 bucks and walk away and that's the end of it? Or, when it comes to passenger rights, and there would be rights specifically involved in something like this, what does happen? Gabor Lukacs is president. And we've spoken, by the way, before. I should mention that here on the show, right, to Gabor Lukacs, president of Air Passenger Rights. He is on the line. Gabor, thank you for the time. So let's get into this. $30,000 is the offer. Does that seem reasonable?
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you. $30,000 is I would say it's a good start. If you did not sustain any physical injuries, you may want to consider just taking it and calling it a day. If you did sustain any kind of physical injury, I would have a second look at it. Either case, you may want to seek legal advice from a trained lawyer. This is not just a small claims court matter. This is not just a broken baggage issue. This is a serious amount of money, serious legal consequences. So I would, on this occasion, urge every affected passenger to seek legal advice from a trained legal professional who has actually experience and knowledge with the Montreal Convention, not just any lawyer, but somebody who is familiar with the Montreal Convention.
Gabor, would this matter as to locale? So the plane crashed in Toronto, but it left from the U.S. Would that matter as far as where the obligation here is?
The obligations are governed by an international treaty called the Montreal Convention, to which both Canada and the U.S. are signatories. So the only question that arises here, and that's again governed by the Montreal Convention, is where the passenger can sue. They can sue in the state where the airline is domiciled, to the U.S., in a state where the ticket was bought, and the state of final destination, which for many but not all passengers may be Canada. So there are questions of where the passenger may sue, but the rights of the passengers, if the Montreal Convention is interpreted correctly, are supposed to be the same no matter in which country you sue, because that's the whole point of the Montreal Convention, is to create some kind of uniformity among all countries, to have all same rules for accidental death and injury of passengers.
So let me ask, do we have anything to compare this to? Because obviously, you're going to look for precedent of some kind. Here you have everybody surviving. Do you know of a situation similar to this, and what would have happened there, or what did happen?
I cannot think of a comparator, and I don't think I would look at it through simply the lens of a comparator. I would just suggest to look at the case itself on its merits, on what happened, and I would also perhaps, before deciding whether to seek more than $30,000, I would want to see some information about what actually happened, why this accident happened.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So we know that's going to take a while. That could be weeks, it could be months. And then based on what we find out then, why would that change anything? Because someone would be at fault, perhaps?
Well, if there's some other party at fault, then there's nothing wrong with taking $30,000 if it is clear in the paperwork that there are really no strings attached. But the question is, okay, I have now $30,000. What do I do next? Do I still pursue somebody else?
Right.
Do I pursue the airline? Do I pursue the airport? Do I pursue whoever other else, maybe the aircraft manufacturer? I'm just tossing ideas. I'm not saying that any of these people are guilty of anything, but hypothetically, these are potential defendants. So you ask those questions, and ultimately, you will know more once you see the report of what caused the accident. My knee-jerk reaction would be, if you didn't have a physical injury, it would be a more challenging battle to get more compensation under the Montreal Convention. There is a recent 2022 case from Ontario Superior Court that at least opens the door to psychological damages, which in the past have been rejected under the Montreal Convention in the case of accidents. So there is a little bit of opening there, putting the leg in the door, but it would really take a lawyer who is very familiar with the legal system and with the Montreal Convention specifically to actually make not just a leg in the door with actual compensation if you didn't have an actual physical injury, bodily injury. If you were injured, if among those who were injured, then it is an easier situation. Even then, I would suggest you consult a personal injury lawyer who is an expert both in Montreal Convention and in personal injury to see what amount of compensation is reasonable based on the case law.
It's funny, to what you just said now, you're talking about physical injury. We don't know necessarily the extent. We know everyone's out of a hospital now, but with respect to psychological injury here, I don't think it's a big stretch to assume that some of these people who had to go through this are either never going to want to fly again, or, there is some trauma associated with this, I guess, as well, right?
Obviously, there's trauma. The problem is that, say, 20 years ago, such psychological damages were explicitly rejected by courts who were interpreting the Warsaw Convention, and that has become kind of the case law to some degree also for the Montreal Convention. So there's one case from Ontario which says, well, current modern times, we don't really distinguish that way the physical injury from psychological injury. They're both part of our body that's being injured. So there is some opening there that a good lawyer could then build up an argument on, but it is not a slam dunk. While if you did have a physical injury, then the only question is how much, because liability would be beyond question at that point.
So from what you've seen so far, and I think we all, I think for the most part agree that once this happened, everyone did the job they were supposed to do about as good as it could be done, right? From the flight attendants to the crew on the ground at Pearson Airport. You agree with that?
The fact that people got out alive is certainly a good sign. I cannot opine on who did what. It's very encouraging, but that's why we have the TSB, the Transportation Safety Board, to investigate. And on its face, I cannot see any obvious error by anybody after the accident happened. I think I would agree with it. There's no obvious thing that sticks out. However, I don't want to preempt the findings of the TSB. I respect that body, and they should be reporting on what they find.
I would just ask with respect to Delta, and again, I think a lot of people wondered how long this would take. Delta acted pretty quickly, and the fact that they offered the money beyond that and simply said there are no strings attached, I was impressed by that as well. We spend a lot of time criticizing airlines. How do you feel in this particular case Delta acted?
My understanding is that in the U.S. it's kind of required. That's what I've been reading up. That at least in case of death, there's a requirement. In case of injury, there's a strong expectation. Some airlines actually even have some terms and conditions that affect in their contract. Mm-hmm. So in the U.S. it's quite common to do what they did. It is still great. It was an honorable thing to do for sure after the accident, and I commend Delta for acting so quickly. Having said that, in such situations, it is not uncommon to act this very, very, very quickly.
I would ask one last thing. With respect to, and I think someone has suggested the idea that we're talking 76 passengers here. Is there the possibility, from what you believe, of a class action suit, or is this all going to be people independently going after the airline for whatever it is they're going after?
It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure if I will go into speculation. 76 is a bit small number in many cases for class action. There's also the question that liability is established by the Montreal Convention. Montreal Convention creates an absolute liability up to 282,000 Canadian dollars. So liability will not be a common question because it's predetermined in a way. And the damages themselves will vary depending on what type of injury you sustain. So it may be that still need to be assessed. Honestly, I don't know. I think that class actions have their place in such situations if they can simplify and expedite having a resolution for the matter, because we don't want 76 different legal proceedings about the same accident. It's not a good use of valuable judicial resources. So it might, but I would hope that airlines will just settle. That's about it. I mean,
like best case scenario. Okay, I got it. Gabor, I want to thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you, of course. Gabor Lukacs, president of Air Passenger Rights, on what happens next with that Delta situation.